I've been thinking a lot recently um, about belief. I think about it a lot anyway, just because uh, I think it's a good question to be putting under the microscope all the time. But I find myself thinking about it a lot as I watch the news, how driven we are by belief, how driven we are to find beliefs and to hold on to them as a way of guiding us. I've seen some things on social media recently that speak to this and also speak to the dangers of it. One that rolls by periodically, a reminder, essentially, that if your God conveniently hates everybody you do, maybe you need to examine your beliefs. Or others in a more political realm saying that, if your political beliefs conveniently don't ask you to change your behaviors under any circumstances, maybe you need to re-examine your beliefs. And those are both nice, and they're both kind of catchy, easy to remember. But the real message is at the end of both of them, which is it might be time to examine your beliefs. We don't talk about belief a lot, I think, in Zen, except maybe to kind of undermine it. But of course, Buddhism rests on what we might call core beliefs. Or if we're uncomfortable with beliefs, we might say there are some very strong operational assumptions within Buddhism. But really, they're probably beliefs. And I only want to say tonight that we should always be examining them. We should notice how they land in the body. There are times when beliefs feel like a fuzzy blanket, and there are times when they feel like an itchy sweater. Noticing that, recognizing that, matters. If we look to the Buddha, if we look to the beginning of the Buddha's story, we can imagine that he had certain operational assumptions early in his life. We don't know exactly what they were, but we are led to believe that he thought things would always be as they were, that things would go his way, that people would treat him well, and they would bring his meals. And not only that, because it has this fog of myth around it as well, it's not just that he thought he would continue in his station, but that he would continue as he was, and that the people around him would continue as they were, which is to say they would stay young and they would stay healthy. They would stay happy for whatever happiness meant for them. Whether this was a belief, an unarticulated faith, an assumption, this is what he carried until that day that he left the palace and he looked out at the world as it was. And Buddhism begins with him, A, losing that prior set of beliefs completely, and B, investing in a new set, which we can look at in different ways. We might look at them as the remembrances, right? The recognition that others will grow old and that he would grow old, that others would get sick and that he would get sick, that others would die and that he would die. And a fourth harder one to define, that if one looks at those other three carefully, if one keeps those at the center, that there might be a different way of living, there might be a different way of seeing. I think he believed that too, even though he couldn't see what it looked like on the other side. Now, how are these for beliefs? You might determine in your own life that these are useful or not useful, that they're true or untrue, but they pass a very simple litmus test, which is that they are uncomfortable. Which is why they mattered for him. It's why they have continued to matter this long. These are beliefs that are in tension with how we want things to be. And anytime we find ourselves unable to not believe the thing that pushes back against the thing we wish we could believe, that's pretty good. There's possibility there. There's another way of framing what happened that day for the Buddha, which might be how Zen people would talk about it more often. Not just the nature of growing old, or the nature of the fragility of the body, or the nature of death, but not knowing. The Buddha suddenly knew something he hadn't known, but in discovering that, he discovered how much he did not know. He realized in one afternoon that he didn't know anything. The world became wildly alive for him in a way that it had never been. He became curious about it in a way that he had never been. And that curiosity sparked a passion in him that had never been there. To confront it, to address it, to engage with it. Not because he knew what to do, but exactly because he did not know what to do. He said, I finally see the human condition. I need to do something about it. I don't know how. And so we can also say that Buddhism rests on this not knowing. Not the opposite of belief, but a kind of certainty in the bones. That we're not seeing the whole thing. It is very useful, and I try to do this often, and I try to do it with my kids, to ask yourself, what do I believe? Really? It's a really hard question, because you can talk yourself out of it as you do it. You have to be able to, it's like catching yourself in a mirror in the department store before you realize you're looking in the mirror, and then you see yourself. You see what you really look like when you're just walking and not noticing yourself, not posing, not standing up straighter, not smirking, whatever it is. It's like, oh, that's me. You have to catch that first moment. You have to ask yourself, when the news comes on, and the question is, for example, do social services for everyone bring society up, or do they weaken it? When I say that, you probably immediately have an idea about which one of those is true. There's a belief. There's an operational assumption that for some of us might be common kind of a question, but for many might be so deep that that isn't worth exploring anymore, because that one's done. I know the answer to that. but we don't know. We know how gravity works on a basic level. We know if I know that if I throw an apple up in the air, it will come back down. And I know where the supermarket is. I have object permanence. So I understand those simple things. And I feel comfortable saying, I know. But these bigger things, the things that guide the way that we practice, the things that guide the way that we vote, the things that guide our instant decisions about other people. Oh, this person might be my friend, or this person never will be. Those are not things that we know. Those are beliefs. And for the most part, they are unexamined. Of course they are, because we believe them. Why would we dissect them? Why would we pick them apart? I don't want to suggest that we should second guess everything. Not knowing, as I hear it in this tradition, is not the same as poking at yourself all the time. And I also don't mean to say that we should reject something just because it feels good. But we should also notice when something feels good and whether that's influencing the way we think about it. I'll give you a simple example, which is that every time that I publish something or write something that has to do with sexism in Buddhist history, or something that has to do with racism in Buddhist sanghas, I get angry emails from people. And the angry emails will say, you're wrong to talk about this because Buddhists understand that from an absolute perspective, there is no such thing as race, and there is no such thing as gender. There is only emptiness. If you saw that, you wouldn't talk about these things. Some people shook their heads just now, as if it's ridiculous that someone would say such a thing. But the fact is that this is a very convenient and very popular way to wear Buddhism as a fuzzy blanket. But the reality, as I see it, is, and I want to acknowledge, looking at emptiness all the time, really confronting emptiness all the time, it's not like that's easy. It's not like that's a relaxed stance, you know. That's a big thing to be staring at. It's a big thing to be trying to hold. But does it sting in the same way as recognizing, for example, that people around you are suffering and that you might be part of the systems by which they suffer now? If you're using one to talk yourself out of the other, then you need to examine your beliefs. They're a little convenient. We have to be conscious of the ways in which we can use Buddhist teachings to feel better rather than be looking at those basic things that the Buddha saw. And then I think we also have to be careful, and I say this here because we're all sharing this practice, but this goes for anything, not to let it become a security blanket in the face of things we disagree with. When I am in the presence of someone who is saying something that I think is too simple, or is harmful, or is absurd, and they're coming at it from a position of belief, whether it's political belief or religious belief or a combination of the two, I can feel how Buddhism, which does feel itchy to me so much of the time, starts to feel very soft and warm in that moment, in that encounter, because I think, well, I may not know much, but I know that that's wrong. And in that moment, I start to let go of the discomfort of confronting the questions I'm being asked to confront in exchange for the comfort of feeling like the questions in front of me are resolved. That's a terrible way to use these teachings. It's a terrible way to use this practice. And it's also just very human. There's no easy way to wrap this up. No one finishes it. No one gets to the end of this project. This is just simply encouragement to make a point of noticing how much of your thought process rests on things that feel like they don't have to be examined anymore. And when you notice that, to ask yourself, are those things that I rest in so comfortably, do they make me feel safe and secure? Or do they itch a little bit? Do they challenge me a little bit? Do they push me? Do they push me into that place of not knowing? Follow the itch. That's where I'll stop.